Rob Wittman. He's from the 1st District of Virginia, regular on our show, Republican. He's also the chairman of the Military Readiness Subcommittee. That's part of the House Armed Service Committee. He's also a doctor, so when we feel formal, we call him Dr. Wittman. When we don't, we just call him Rob. But Dr. Wittman joining us now. Good to have you with us, sir.
John, it's great to be here with you this morning. Boy, it's great to hear about the exploits of your son there in baseball. I tell you, there's no greater sport than baseball. There's nothing more fun than watching our children play. So
it is a lot of fun. And when you play travel ball, he's on the 10 and under team. It's a lot of fun because you get to be friends with everybody because you spend. I mean, we spend every weekend traveling with 10 or 12 other moms and dads. So. You got to get along with everybody, but it's a lot of fun. Our Bombers team coming from nowhere, and I think we're going to win this tournament. Now, you just got back from Iraq.
Yes.
You went with Texas Congressman Bill Flores, I believe, and you were in Baghdad. You had a chance to meet with Prime Minister al-Abadi, and you met with Kurdish leaders, U.S. military leaders. Give us your take, sir, from your trip.
Well, John, what we're seeing is that there is some success being achieved against ISIS. With the airstrikes, we have essentially killed about 14,000 ISIS fighters. The difficulty is that they continue to recruit them at a record pace and bring them in. I think there's good coordination between American advisors and Iraqi forces in prosecuting this fight. I did get to observe our U.S. military training Iraqi military. I think that effort is going well. The difficulty is there's just not enough of it. You know, we only have about 10,000 Iraqi soldiers now that are trained and ready to go, and it's certainly going to take more than that to defeat ISIS. Another issue there is when I met with Prime Minister Abadi is there's still, I believe, a ways to go for Iraq to have proper command and control over its military. As you know, in the situation there in Ramadi, when those forces left, the Prime Minister was on the phone to his generals saying, please don't leave, stay there. His Secretary of Defense also, and the generals did not. They left. So there needs to be proper command and control there if they're to be successful in the long run in defeating ISIS. There's also issues of the government itself operating properly. As you know, the government under Prime Minister Maliki did not. Maliki is still there. He's one of the vice presidents of the party that Prime Minister Abadi belongs to. Mm-hmm. So Prime Minister Abadi's got to make some difficult decisions to do several things, John. First of all, is he has to be able to coalesce the Shia militia to help them defeat ISIS. The Shia militias are pretty powerful groups, but as you know, they're tribal, so you have to make sure that you can not only obtain their trust, but also coordinate with them in these efforts. What's happening now is we're seeing Iranians come in, Shias from Iran come in, and work with these Shia militias in going after ISIS. Now that's a good thing now, but the question is it such a good thing for Iraq after ISIS is defeated? Because the question is how much Iranian influence will then be there in Iraq. Also, the Sunni groups, the moderate Sunni groups that you need to coalesce around defeating ISIS also has to happen. The Sunnis there still have a deep distrust of the Shias because of what happened with the Maliki government. So there's a lot of things going on there that are going to make it difficult for Prime Minister Abadi in the long run to be successful. But first of all, they have to secure the country. Security comes first. They have to defeat ISIS. And, John, this is going to be a long-term challenge for them. It's not going to be done in a month or two. This is going to be years on end, and they're going to have to be able to coalesce all the different forces in the country. And we went up to Kurdistan. We went up there and visited with the Kurds. We visited with Prime Minister Barzani. Got a great perspective on the Kurds, and the Peshmerga have been extraordinarily successful in defeating ISIS, pushing it out of Kurdish territory there. In fact, they pushed them even out of what's normally Kurdish territory. They have a front line of troops there that are defending that area. In fact, I think tomorrow they could go in and retake Mosul. The difficulty is Mosul is in the Arab regions of Iraq, so it makes it politically difficult for them to do. Strategically, they could do it, but politically difficult for them to do because the Iraqis want to come in with their forces to be able to do that. But we have now sent arms to the Kurds for them to be able to defeat ISIS. As you know, the big ISIS is now taking these big dump trucks, welding steel plate on them, essentially up-armoring them, putting massive amounts of explosives-grade fertilizer in there, and they're very, very destructive. We gave them these rocket-propelled grenades for them to defeat those essentially rolling bombs. But the Peshmerga are extraordinarily capable fighting force, and they've done a great job in the northern areas of the country. I just wish we could see that same success with Iraqi forces in other areas of the country. And then that leads to the ultimate question, Don, is, when you get to the point of securing the country, then what does the country look like? What does the governance look like? Do you go back to what it was before? I don't think you can. I think you have to find ways to allow the Kurdish areas or Kurdistan to operate more independently of Baghdad. I think you have to find ways to make sure that the Sunnis feel empowered. They're the minority there, and they have been mistreated badly. They have to be part of whatever governance comes out of this. So there are a lot of challenges there. I still think it can be done, but it will not be easy. And John, I believe this strongly. It cannot and should not be done solely by U.S. forces. U.S. forces can be there to help. We can provide air support. We can supply special operations support. We can provide intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. We can provide help in command and control. But ultimately, it has to be Iraqi forces. It has to be Kurdish forces. I think it ought to be forces from other neighboring countries that also have an interest there to secure that region and to make sure it stays secure. We could come back in, spend a lot of additional U.S. dollars, a lot of additional U.S. blood would be shed there and re-secure the country, but I believe it would go right back to where it is now with lack of governance. And the only way in the long term that country is going to remain stable is for the current Iraqi government to get its act together, to bring together all the disparate factions there, and to make sure that they have help from other neighboring Arab nations. That's the way this will work in the long term.
Congressman Wittman, as you're saying that, it makes a lot of sense on paper. The reality is that the Iraqi army has proved over and over and over not to be worthy. In time of trouble, the officers run away, the troops lay down their arms, which ends up being taken over by ISIS. They run away. What is going to be different? Now we find out that we spent all these millions of dollars to train so-called Syrian moderates, rebels, which, as you know, I was adamantly in opposition to that. Now we find out we only trained 60 of them. We spent like $3 million each. So for the average person on the outside looking in, this entire policy is a catastrophe. And so I don't see how we change it.
Well, John, I think you're spot on about training Syrian fighters. It's very difficult, first of all, to identify who would be a moderate Syrian, what their allegiances are, and then how would they engage in a fight that doesn't ultimately come back and not support U.S. interests there. So I think that's a very, very difficult issue. I think obviously what's gone on has been ineffective and wasteful, so that has to stop, and we got to change direction there. We haven't trained enough Iraqi fighters, and again, it is very, very difficult to gauge allegiances in that area, especially with the divisions between Sunni tribes, Shia tribes, and even the Kurds. So the question then becomes if your military is going to work, you have to have military leaders that are not corrupt. There's still corruption in the Iraqi military. I think that's one of the main reasons that they see this lack of command and control. So you got to be able to get rid of corruption in the Iraqi military. But you won't get rid of it there, John, until you get rid of corruption within the Iraqi government. I still believe that there's corruption there within the Iraqi government. Now, I think Prime Minister Abadi knows what to do. The key for him is, will he have the ability to do it? with all these disparate factions there, and knowing that if he does the things that are necessary, that places him in harm's way. So I think he's got some really tough choices to make. I think he understands it. I think he has the wherewithal to do it. It's bigger than just him, though. He's going to have to find some other people there that are willing to do that with him, and it has to start from the top. If you're going to have an effective military, you got to eliminate corruption for the most part. Mm-hmm. And remember, corruption will exist there, but it's in different ways. You have to get to the point where that government can function, and then make sure that they get to the military and weed out military leaders that either won't act or are corrupt, and get to a point where you have a military that can function.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to get to a segment we had a week ago with your colleague, senior Democrat Senator Mark Warner, who said, you know what, maybe it's time we just sectionalize Iraq into 3 separate sections. The government can't work. Is that a possible answer?
Well, John, I think it is a question that we need to ask. Obviously, Iraqis don't like that. I know that when the House and the Senate considered giving arms directly to the Kurds, the Iraqi government didn't like that. In fact, when I went there and met with the Speaker of the Iraqi Parliament, they were pretty adamant about what they believed we had in mind by doing that. They believed by doing that we had in mind, indeed, dividing the country, Kurdish areas, Sunni areas, and Shia areas.
Right.
Now, I think the Kurds can operate very independently, so I think you could take the Kurdistan area there and say, hey, listen, you guys operate independently. You can be part of the country of Iraq, but you are a strong, independent entity. Trying to then, though, do the same thing with the Shia and Sunni areas becomes more difficult because in many areas they're kind of geographically intertwined. So it's not like you could draw a clear boundary and say, hey, this is whatever you want to call it, Shia-stan, this is Sunni-stan. You would have a much more difficult time doing that. That being said, I do believe, John, that you have to ask the question about how effective can the government in Baghdad be in running the country? Mm-hmm. And maybe what should be looked at is to strengthen the regional governments there and the governors, but even the tribal leaders to have a different form of government because obviously what's happening out of Baghdad has not been effective. So I do think you have to ask the question. I don't think it's as simple as cutting the country up into Kurdistan or Shia-stan or Sunni-stan, whatever the names may be. The Kurdish area, probably fairly simple, but the other area is a little bit more difficult.
Okay, Congressman, the Department of Defense has called for a troop drawdown. I got a clip I'm going to play, and then I want to get your comments on it.
Sure.
Listen, a number of bases, as we're learning, will be affected. Major cuts specifically to Georgia, Alaska, Hawaii, Washington, Oregon, and California. Fort Benning and Fort Hood each will lose more than 3,000 troops between this year and 2017. So let's talk about the repercussions here with our CNN military analyst, General Mark Hertling. General, always wonderful to have you on. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Brooke.
How will this impact U.S. operations, bottom line?
Well, it will affect it tremendously. But this is not new, Brooke. This has been happening over the last several years. We've been decreasing the size of the Army starting in about 2011. This is just the latest amount of cuts. But the reason it's gaining so much attention is because it's affecting congressional bases here in the United States. When you start reducing the number of soldiers at bases, congressmen get very upset about it. I mean, I will tell you, my last command was in Europe where we were not a constituency of a congressman, and we've been cutting forces in Europe and in Asia for the past several years in the tens of thousands. But now it's gathering attention because it is affecting employment and the civilians' communities around these bases.
How does this make any sense at all based on the state that we're in right now internationally and in the Middle East?
John, it's unimaginable that in the face of the world we see today, the dangers around us, that we would reduce our land forces in the Army by 40,000. Just the day before yesterday, the incoming chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Joe Dunford, was asked about the risks around the world. And he said they were in this order: Russia, China, North Korea. All of those threats, John, we have to have land forces to counter whatever might happen there. And to take the Army from 490,000 to 450,000 is just unbelievably bad. Secondly is as I've met with Army leaders, I hear the same thing, that going below 490,000 takes away the Army's ability to perform its basic functions that it's required to do, those requirements that are laid out there that says the Army will do A, B, C, and D. And what's going to happen is the Army just won't be able to do the things that it's being asked to do. And then somebody's going to have to make a tough decision and say, well, what is it that we don't respond to? Or what is it that we aren't able to do when asked to do it? And what signal does this send to our adversaries that say, hey, look, the United States is further degrading its military, so does that then further engage and put into a bad situation in the United States when it comes to someone like Kim Jong-un in North Korea that looks at this and goes, hey, look at this, I can get away with more because the United States just doesn't have the ability. The same with Vladimir Putin. I mean, look at it. You know, he is pursuing a conventional land force strategy in the Ukraine when they took Crimea, and I believe next in the Baltics. And with our forces being reduced, it's going to embolden him even more. So these leaders out there that are already acting aggressively, just think of the signal that this sends to them. So first of all, our Army now, in being asked to do the very basic elements of the job, won't be able to do it with a force of 450,000. This will embolden our adversaries around the world to say, hey, the United States is going to do even less. And the soldiers, the brave men and women that serve in our Army, when asked to go in harm's way, their job will be much more difficult, much more risky. So in the end, John, I think you'll see this. You'll have an Army that will do too little, it will be too late, and they'll suffer many more casualties. And that's not because of anything that any soldier will do. It's because of what they're being asked to do and the number of soldiers that they have to do it.
Mr. Chairman, can Congress do anything to stop this?
Well, we can. You know, we're undertaking the National Defense Authorization Act today as we speak. Congress budgets for the military. We put dollars in there. We, through our policy, through authorization, set what end strength will be. So, yes, we have the ability to affect this, and we must. That's our constitutional responsibility, John, is to make sure we defend this nation and we provide for its armies and navies. That's clear in the Constitution. And by any measure, regardless of who you talk to, regardless of service branch, and while they're competitive amongst each other, they understand that they are all working in a joint environment. That is, they all help each other, and that an Army that goes to an end strength of 450,000 is a dangerous place for us to be. So Congress has to act. Congress has to take this issue up, and I believe that it will, and I believe ultimately that Congress, both the House and the Senate, will do what's in the best interest of the nation and stand by our constitutional obligation to provide for our nation's defense.
There's many of us that we call laymen, if you will, outside of the system, don't have the intel that you have, but it just seems that with everything going on and all the money that we waste, drawing down our troop strength by 10% just doesn't make any sense at all. I've got a couple more minutes. I want to get to the Iranian negotiations. 2 more minutes. Where do you think we are now on this?
Well, I still think we're at a point where any deal that comes out of there, in my mind, would not be acceptable. We have moved away from the place that we need to be. And, John, you got to have an agreement that has 3 elements. One is you have to completely disassemble and move out any capacity to produce nuclear material that's weaponizable. Secondly is you have to make sure that there's unfettered, unrestricted access to inspections to make sure that you can inspect and ensure the capacity is gone. And third is the nuclear material that they produce that is weaponizable has to be turned over to an independent third-party nation for that to be either processed or used for other non-proliferation means. You got to do those 3 things. Anything less than that just slows down Iran's capability to produce a weapon. And remember, too, if you lift the sanctions, you're giving them even more economic opportunity to accelerate that program. So it runs counter to common sense to say that a program that lifts sanctions and doesn't do those other 3 things is in any way, shape, or form a good deal.
It absolutely makes no sense. We'll see how it plays out. More information, Wittman.house.gov, Wittman.house.gov. Want to sign up for his newsletter. Absolutely don't want to miss that, whitman.house.gov. We're on a time. We want to thank Congressman Rob Wittman for being with us today. Congressman, we always appreciate your coming on and being so in-depth and trying to explain everything that's happening, sir. Thank you so much.
John, thanks so much. You have a great weekend, and best of luck to your son in his baseball game.